Yeah, I can see the enthusiasm in the audience. And we are very eager to hear out Mr. J. Sai Deepak. And here is his brief introduction. Of course, he doesn't need introduction at all. So with great pleasure, I welcome Mr. J. Sai Deepak. He is a litigator and has been practicing as an arguing counsel, primarily before Supreme Court of India and the High Court of Delhi. A mechanical engineer from Anna University, Sai graduated with a bachelor's degree in law from IIT Kharagpur's law school in 2009 and has carved a niche for himself as a litigator in civil, commercial, and constitutional matters. He has been part of several landmark cases of commercial and constitutional significance before the Supreme Court and the High Court of Delhi. In 2019, Sai was presented the Young Alumni Achievers Award by his alma mater, IIT Kharagpur. He has also authored books which are bestsellers, India, that is Bharat, and the other one, India, Bharat and Pakistan, The Constitutional Journey, A Sandwich Civilization. With this formal introduction, I would like to share that there is another avenue of Sai. He is an exceptional orator, and he knows exactly what he stands for. Sai's ability to stimulate critical thinking and offer unique perspectives has been truly commendable. He has been in several debates on several such issues. In fact, he is a social media persona with a huge fan base. I pass the baton to you, Sai. I'm so sorry. I formally welcome Sai on behalf of Ahmedabad Management Association and all of us.
Good evening. Thanks for braving the weather and surprisingly even Ahmedabad's roads. I didn't expect it. So I thank the AMA for giving me an opportunity to interact with the audience of Ahmedabad from such a prestigious platform. For the last 2 days I've been trying to understand more about the antecedents of AMA. I didn't know, to be honest, much to my embarrassment, that this was actually founded by the great Vikram Sarabhai. So thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I hope to make the best use of it. It's surprising that I actually haven't had the opportunity as much as I thought I should have to interact with people of Ahmedabad or Gujarat for that matter on certain sensitive issues. So it's great that finally I get to speak on these topics. I think we have about 1.5 hours, so I will limit the scope of my monologue to at best 20-25 minutes. And about 45 minutes will be given to the audience to come after me with whatever they have. On the topic, of course. I'm not going to present any conclusions. I'm certainly not going to present any rigid opinions, contrary to popular perception of me. I'm just trying to throw a few questions open. I see a few familiar faces. That's my junior from law school, Nishid, who's here. Hi. I'm going to try and present a few questions in the hope that even if you don't agree with my conclusions on those questions, at the very least, these questions will take you to conclusions which were different from the ones you previously held. That is the hope. A shift in the position that everybody holds is what I push for as much as possible, in the right direction, pun intended. So on the subject, why is it that I have chosen to focus on this particular subject of the last 4 or 5 years? Because I think the understanding of the Constitution, both among practitioners and people who speak frequently of constitutionalism, has been hijacked and straitjacketed because of ideological positions. Having said that, I don't want to blame anyone for the ideological positions they hold, because I don't think there's any person who is ideologically neutral. If at all they are neutral, they are apathetic because they're not interested. But if they do take an interest, by and large, they're bound to tilt one way or the other. The degree of tilt may be different from person to person, but the tilt nevertheless exists. So that's one reason that I have never ever put up a facade of neutrality. I'd rather place my position up front with the hope that I have enough ammunition to back it up with facts, logic, reason, and rhetoric wherever necessary, sarcasm wherever necessary. And then leave it to the public or the audience to draw their own conclusions. Mulyankan aap karte rahiye, whether it's right or wrong, but my job is to basically put forth my position. So I don't blame or hold anyone responsible for lack of neutrality. I would always blame someone who's hypocritical, not for an ideological position at all. And I say this with a lot of respect, I do not agree with almost any position, almost being the operative word, not any, almost any position held by my intellectual, or let's say my ideological counterparts from the other side. But I deeply and grudgingly admire their conviction and the fact that they hold on to it. Not that I would judge them if they were to gradually evolve in their positions, but it has to be an evolution. It shouldn't be a change as a consequence of the change in political winds. And if somebody changes that, then I lose respect for the person immediately. At the very least for their positions, and I don't take their positions as seriously that I used to before. On this subject, what I've tried to do is to establish a link, firstly between the journey of the civilization and this synthetic document. I don't call it an organic document, this synthetic document called the Constitution. Why do I call it a synthetic document? Because if you were to believe that culture and religion are organic, Constitution is rarely organic. At least in the context of Bharat, I would say the Constitution's history is not at all organic. It is as synthetic as it gets, it is as top-down as it gets, it is as imposed as it could get. And I say this equally of the Constitution of 1950. And when that happens, in relation to a document which is bound to, which is intended to, which is by design expected to have an all-encompassing effect, then it obviously has a direct bearing on the destiny of the civilization itself, on your ability to say a few things, on your ability to actually prove a few things, on your ability to reclaim a few things, on your ability to speak the truth on the basis of facts. Because the Constitution, while it enables free speech, also imposes several filters, express and unspoken, both. And I basically wanted to break free of those filters. So most people sometimes assume, perhaps he's a loose cannon, who doesn't have a political filter, who doesn't have a filter when he speaks. I can say this confidently. Almost everything that I have said, I have thought it through. Not that I'm always right. I'm not saying I'm always right. At the very least, I know what exactly I'm saying and why I'm saying it. If my positions have changed, it's because I may have read better, or somebody may have told me, sorry, you're wrong, read this literature better. So for instance, my own position on Dr. Ambedkar has evolved over the last 3.5 years, at the very least, and I've said this openly on public platforms. And sometimes it is important for somebody to kick that door open, because all the time you see only an incremental push. I think once in a while, history or Kal or Vidhi presents an opportunity to punch your way through certain positions. Or it forces you to punch, simply because if you don't, then your position becomes, how do I put it? You will be forced to tie yourself down to that particular position. You will be told you never made your position clear in the past. So it's like this. Assume for a moment that there is one person who slapped once, who chooses to be silent about it. He slapped again by the same person. He chooses to be silent about it. The 10th or the 15th time, the slapper gets to blame the slappee. तुम चुप रहे थे, मैं क्या करूं? You were silent all this while. You should have said it before. Where is the resistance? Ask lawyers, they'll tell you the concept of adverse possession of property is no different. You keep your mouth shut for 12 years when somebody's occupied your property, he gets to say, you never raised a little finger in resistance. That's the end of the matter. That's how the law works. I'm applying the very same logic when it comes to articulation, ventilation, and expression of opinions on constitution and inherent biases within the constitution and imposed biases on the constitution both. And one of the reasons, despite what I've said so far, rarely have people found the guts to take me legally, is because at the very least I'll have something or the other to throw at them in terms of a document. 3, the reason why I speak of judicial intervention is to address the aspect of imposed biases, where the human agent who's tasked with the obligation or the responsibility of looking into that particular document brings her, his, or his, her, they, them, whatever biases, okay, to the document. I'm not per se against any identity, so please don't mistake that sarcasm for a problem with any particular identity. I have a problem with imposed identities, or in terms of language impositions. I'm not particularly comfortable with it. And I certainly don't think the West needs to teach us anything about respecting non-binary gender identities. We have always done so. So you can take your garbage and go to some other place. I'm the last person who's interested in consuming this. And I've said this in fact publicly once. I might as well repeat it very clearly. I'm never going to subscribe to this pronoun nonsense ever. My LinkedIn profile will never say his, him and all that. You can see it. It's okay. Relax. So the point I'm trying to perhaps make is these layers within the Constitution, the nexus between the Constitution and civilization, have not received the unpacking that has long been waiting. And the hope is that someone who is interested in the civilization and is reasonably trained in the Constitution, and who understands how judicial intervention works on a day-to-day basis, actually brings it out. So it is long due. So there have been instances where you have fantastic people, both from the English-speaking circles and the non-English speaking circles, who have done a fabulous study of the Constitution. So there is perhaps an 18-volume treatise written by Sri Devendra Swarup in Hindi on the Constitution. I would seriously advise people to read it, or at least suggest people to read it. It's very, very important. It's a very native perspective, and therefore warrants mandatory reading. That's one. And there have been instances where lawyers have spoken of the Constitution purely from a legal lens, purely from a narrow lens, purely from the prism of constitutionalism. But where is the bridge? Where is the bridge? And that bridge is needed to be built as quickly as possible, because people actually underestimate the impact that the Constitution, the judgments of the Supreme Court have had on positions in media, positions in public discourse, and then education system, and our own ability to conduct our discussions in private conversations. It has that granular effect right down to private conversations. I've seen so many people spout this utterly idiotic, ignorant statement that we are a secular country. I said, no, we are not a secular country. Secularism, at best, is an imposition on the state, not on the society. When you speak of the country, it is state plus society. You don't say that. You have to separate both. That obligation is cast on the state, it is not on the society. How can you actually be a secular country with Article 25 and 26 recognizing a right to practice your religion? How is that even possible? But when these kind of statements are passed off, what does it mean? That our understanding of a certain constitutional value or perceived constitutional value is percolated down to our private conversations to the extent that it stifles your ability to assert your own private identity. How is that even possible? That was the last thing the Constitution was meant to do. The Constitution was never meant to replace our religions with Constitution as a religion. I'm sorry, that was not even Dr. Ambedkar's vision. So why is this becoming the new religion at all? It is at best a document of administration. It is at best a document of giving us a certain sense of direction. But it can't be the be-all and end-all. There is this, how many people have heard of Nicholas Nassim Taleb? Okay, the Prime Minister recently had an opportunity to meet him in the United States. But independent of his good fortune that the stars aligned that he met Modi ji, the fact is that the man is one of the finest living brains I would certainly call him a certified living genius, not because he comes from the West, not for that, but because he really has understood the deep relationship between probability, life, and whatnot. It makes for fantastic reading. His understanding of this creature, organic creature called society, is brilliant. So read his books, particularly this book called Anti-Fragile and all that. You should read it. You should certainly read it. Ask him, anybody who makes an argument with him on the basis of the Constitution, he starts with, "You're a fool, I don't wish to talk with you." Because he says, are you really going to make an argument on the basis of a Constitution? Don't. Because history is always beyond Constitution. History will continue to take its course, regardless of the Constitution. After all, this is not the first Constitution that we have had. We have had Constitutions since 1919. We have had Constitutions even before, in some way or the other, by way of a governing document. Has that stopped history? Did it stop the partition? Did it stop law and order? Did it stop genocide in every possible sense? It did not. So what are we really talking about? So the one thing that I'm certainly trying to do is to break the fetter inside people's head that you're not going to be bound by the Constitution when you think. That is not the same as asking you to disrespect law and order, disrespect the system. No, they are different. I am not asking people to violate the Constitution. I am only telling people, at least when you think, don't be limited by the Constitution, because a document which has been amended over 100 times clearly is not muted. It's not immutable. If the document is capable of being amended, and surely we don't believe that each of these amendments were actually driven by altruism, do we? No. Each of these amendments were actually to cater to the dispensation in power. The very first amendment was to facilitate the gagging of free speech of the critics of Pandit Sri Jawaharlal Nehru. That is the reality of it. Because he didn't want the communists to actually criticize his land reforms. That's why he brought it in the first place. That is the first amendment which should have been challenged in the court of law in a writ petition that has still not been challenged. The number of restrictions and the scope of restrictions on free speech that were introduced after the coming into the force of the Constitution under Article 19.2, or rather 19.6, and on whose advice did he do it? He did it with the advice of the lawyer of the government. Who was the lawyer of the government? The framer of the Constitution, Dr. Ambedkar. So clearly Dr. Ambedkar seemed to have given his assent, at the very least legal advice when sought, on how do you bring about greater fetters on free speech. This is a fact. I can't help it if it hurts sentiments. He was the law minister, then without his knowledge this couldn't have happened. Surely that's a reasonable assumption. And there are documents to prove that he did give his advice on the subject. Right? So this is the history of the document. So let's not make a holy grail out of this particular document. The question that we should ask is, given the peculiar and fairly checkered and troubled history of this subcontinent, does the document help us preserve whatever remains of us? Or is it being used to gradually lower your sense of historical awareness and to put you into deeper slumber? Which is to say, if the drishti is moved away from the civilization to the constitution becomes the subject of discussion all the time and the civilization is relegated to the margins, I don't think it helps. I don't think that is the purpose. And if that was the designed or intended purpose, then there is an even more deeper problem or bigger problem with the history of the drafting of the Constitution itself. I am willing to give the benefit of the doubt that the document was not designed for this purpose. I am still not done with my research on the subject. As and when I'm done with the tetralogy, let's see what happens. But I am proceeding on the basis and giving it the benefit of the doubt that it was not designed for it, but it is being pressed into service for it, is my argument very clearly, and that argument I will not beat around the bush for even 1 second. So if people think that I'm pushing some kind of a victimhood complex, I would use the word victimhood complex or a victim complex when somebody feels like a perpetual victim without basis. That is, they have created a delusion for themselves in their head. They have created an internal schizophrenia where they constantly choose to see themselves as victims. Right? But if I am able to show, here it is, here is the basis, would you still call it victimhood complex? I would say then the use of victimhood complex in respect of someone who's making that argument is actually victim shaming, where you're taking away my right to tell you what exactly has happened with me. So I'll give you a live example. This is not self-edification. I'm simply putting forth my experience as some kind of a prism in terms of what is happening on the subject. So since January end, I started writing on the eve of 30th of January has a particular significance in Indian history, forget it. So that was the day I started writing the book, the series called The Sidebar in Indian Express. My latest piece is called The Majoritarianism Slur, and this was published barely a week ago. Two rejoinders have been written, one by I think a professor of political science, Dr. Rajashri Chandra. I am not naming these people to shame them in any way. I would say that at least Dr. Chandra's rejoinder was very respectful. Certainly not arrogant by any sense, going by traditional leftist standards. It was, I would say it was worthy of engagement, and I hope to put out a response soon. Read my piece first, and then read her criticism of the piece. And you'll know exactly where the battle lines are being drawn. What is the issue? I have made the very clear argument that it's almost as if a particular community is expected to be constantly guilty, or it is meant to feel guilty for existing in the majority despite somebody's best efforts. Okay. And I make that argument in a fairly detailed manner. Clear, unclear, right, wrong, I leave that for you to decide. And I've been told, sorry, this is mansplaining and Savarna-splaining apparently. Apparently these slurs will somehow put me in the defense of all the people. So I'm going to say, yes, as a man I have a right to speak, and yes, as a Savarna I have a right to speak. So what? Tell me where the constitution take away my right to speak. Since you want to make constitutionalism the basis of this entire argument, tell me that I am deprived of the right to speak because I am a man. Not going to happen. Tell me that I am deprived of the right to speak for the culture and for the civilization or the community because I happen to be Savarna. Again, I want to see the constitutional basis for it, because our argument every time when we present something is, Constitution mein kahan likha hai? Well, I am reversing the gaze. Tell me where is it saying in the Constitution that I can't have the right to speak? So I own it, okay. What is it that I have said that is that warrants this kind of a slur? Read this for two reasons. One, forget this sparring on ad hominem attacks. It makes no sense. Merits. Mudde pe, what is the issue? What am I saying? What are they saying? Please try and follow the argument. This audience I certainly urge to keep track of such arguments. Because whether we like it or not, the fact of the matter is not every debate and discourse is bound to be relatable to every section of the society. That is not the case. That's never going to happen. Everybody may have equal right to vote, but does everybody vote with the same degree of sophistication, nuance, maturity, understanding, and for the right reasons? No, they don't. Somewhere the bottle works, somewhere something else works, period. Right? So this particular segment of audience has a greater role and responsibility to follow these debates. Because when we choose to ignore these debates as academic debates, we forget that these positions ultimately form the basis for future legal positions. Discussion से निकलता है policy, policy से निकलता है law. If you don't follow these discussions, you will then suddenly ask yourself, अचानक से ये law कैसे बन गया? अचानक से कुछ नहीं होता है. There is a gestation period, there is a lead period, and most people focus on the starting bindu and the end bindu. बीच की कड़ी सब भूल जाते हैं, and they don't realize, oh, this is what has happened. So therefore, please follow it. I am not someone who's, as a practicing lawyer, put yourself in my shoes for a moment. I am a first generation litigator with practically no godfathers, at least to the best of my knowledge. अगर मेरे सर पे किसी और का हाथ होता, मुझे तो आज तक नजर नहीं आया. Okay? I have very little incentive and a lot of disincentive to criticize the system that I practice in. Is it not? Of course I do. Because everybody who sits there is a human being, and human beings hold grudges. They don't, do they? They're expected not to in certain positions, but people do, right? And yet I've chosen to take this calculated risk because I'm saying somebody has to speak. Vishpan kisi ko to karna padega. It doesn't matter. I'll do it. And also because I certainly believe that every system has people who are introspective. The degree may differ from system to system, from ecosystem to ecosystem, but I believe every system at least has a segment of people who are willing to engage, to understand where the position is coming from, and not just be dismissive of it. So if I, in my position, choose to, I would not say criticize, critique the system where necessary, criticize the system where it is certainly necessary. Surely I'm not doing this in the hope, because you see, okay, let's take this to the most practical consequence possible. Assume for a moment that it contributes to greater publicity, greater reach, because these bombastic statements will be run on Instagram reels and shots and all that. All it can at best translate to is greater visibility here. It's not exactly going to help me in the court where I practice, right? Look at it practically from my perspective. And yet if I'm taking these positions, it's for one very clear reason. The overall acceptability of criticism has changed with introduction of social media. Almost everybody is open to criticism now. There is not a single person who is immune from criticism. Especially after live streaming of arguments, every person's open to criticism now. They can't help it. You wanted transparency, aa gaya transparency, le lo. Right? So the hope is that people use this as a feedback loop. The longer you sit in ivory towers where you have chosen to protect yourself and shield yourself from feedback that's coming from the society, that's not how. Judiciary is expected to be reticent in dealing with power, but not with society. Because you need to understand the pulse of the society that you live in the midst of. Reticence as far as power is concerned is expected to preserve your independence, your integrity. And so that people continue to have faith in you. That should they have a problem with people who wield power, they have another option which is relatively free of any kind of political influence. So therefore, I am a strong votary of judicial independence, without a doubt. But independence from interference with power is very different from immunity from criticism. That is a distinction that people must draw. That is very important. If you have one, I would say the second will follow. The more independent you are, and you have this kind of power over our destinies, you must be open to some kind of feedback in one way or the other. That's the limited argument that I make. And therefore, the confluence of these three concepts is the big picture thesis which is going to occupy me at least until 25-26. By the time I'm done with the series, hopefully I should be done with it. And then what I've done is, I've sown what they call in the coding language Easter eggs in each of these books, which will hopefully explode into multiple spin-offs on each subtopic. So this is more or less like a master template of the broad position that I wish to take. And then I'll dig deep into each of it. So what is happening right now is the crafting of a horizontal document for future verticals. So I'm just giving you the master template in terms of why is it that I've chosen to focus on this particular topic. That's all I have to say by way of a monologue. Please feel free to come after me. And I will take it from here. Please go on. Thank you. In the interest of giving as many people time as possible to ask their questions, introduction, short questions, come to the point as quickly as possible.
Hello, good evening, sir. This is Manush Dadlani, Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.
I want to ask how and why the judiciary sometimes, now it is a human run institution and humans are not free from errors. So by what time or at what point of time should judiciary feel open to criticism? In judicial intervention, in terms of like immunity, you said, right? So at what point we need to draw parallels and draw lines of limits of criticism and openness to the criticism?
Okay, so I always proceed on the basis that criticism on content as opposed to criticism which is personal, The former is open. And I should also say this to be absolutely fair to the institution, of which I am a stakeholder very clearly, is that this institution is not a monolith, because there are a number of people. So when somebody is looking for institutional bias or institutional behavior, they will need to provide some kind of sample set to say 100 में से इतना है, therefore I say there is an institutional bias. After all, there's a saying that one swallow doesn't make a summer, right? You need more examples. The tendency on both sides, whether it's the left, right, center, whatever it is to impute institutional biases, sometimes rightly so, and sometimes without basis. As a lawyer, I believe that every discussion is benefited, or rather it benefits the participants when it gets specific, when it gets barik, when you get down to nuts and bolts. ऊपर से कोई भी कुछ भी कह सकता है. I mean, what is the point in it? You give me some examples. So, to come back to that sparring that's going on the Indian Express, the argument that's been thrown my way is, what do you make of the Ayodhya judgment? If according to you that the institution has a problem with the majority community, then what do you make of the Ayodhya judgment? What do you make of the delimitation issue? What do you make of the Hindutva judgment? I think those are good starting points of an argument, but they are shallow arguments which I'll respond to in my piece. Now the important point is, at least the person criticizing had examples to offer for me to engage meaningfully. Otherwise this fight will be going on in vacuum. You make a theoretical argument, the other person makes a theoretical argument. What is the basis for this? You're not talking of a speculative future, you're talking of an existing conduct. Then you must have some sample set on both sides to discuss, right? So, one, I think it helps to be specific. Two, allow me to say this. As someone who practices before the Delhi High Court and the Supreme Court, primarily as my fora of let's say core commercial practice and constitutional practice, any number of times there are brilliant people. I'm using a gentle neutral term just to be closer to Justin Trudeau here. So there are brilliant people who are very open to upfront criticism during the course of arguments. What is not appreciated is a brash tone. Because you see, you may think that you're going after a particular position or a person, but it is an institution at the end of the day, because the person's occupying an office. That needs to be respected always. Respect the office, disagree with the position with basis, and observe civility in the way you present it. I would always assume that more often than not, a reasonable person occupying that office will accept it, even if they disagree with it. There's a difference. And my experience, as someone who's fairly candid, I wouldn't use the word outspoken because it has the tendency of hinting at recklessness. I'm not reckless. I'm candid with very clear civility inbuilt in the way I present it. Nobody can ever accuse me of crossing the lines of civility unless someone has actually initiated it and it warrants a response left, right, and center to stifle that behavior the next time. I have a duty to respond to ensure they don't make that mistake again, either with me or anybody else. But if not, पहल मेरी तरफ से कभी नहीं होगी. So I would say that the institution is open to it. You want me to give you an example? I'll give you a very clear example. Ask any lawyer who practices on the constitutional side. The jurisdiction of the judiciary is always one of the preliminary arguments when certain issues of social policy are involved, like same-sex marriage or anybody else, or anywhere else. I don't think anybody who's presented a jurisdictional argument has ever been told, "Aukad mein raho." No. Regardless of them being a senior advocate or not, nobody has said this. And it's not something that is happening because of the transparency induced by live streaming. No, even before that. Right? Even before that, people have been like that. So, I am not going to rubbish or dismiss this institution without any basis or in a summary fashion. I will not. One, because I'm a part of the system. Therefore, I know that if someone like me can survive in that system, it's because the system in some ways still makes it possible. So you have to give room for that. And I am not alone here, so people think I'm a lone warrior, nothing of that sort. There are enough people here. It is only the degree of vocalization that changes from person to person. I'm fairly vocal when it comes to some of these subjects because someone needs to say it. It can't be a murmur all the time. Two, the problem with democratization of every discourse is that every Tom, Dick and Harry comments without knowing what he's talking about. But that is the nature of democracy. What can you do? That is the nature of democracy. Because everybody thinks that they have the right to speak, therefore whatever they speak is right. That can't be the way it goes on. No, some of the comments, you should just see it. So recently, during the course of the same-sex arguments, there was a very short misunderstanding between one member of the bench and what I said. Very momentary, very, very momentary. Ask any lawyer, it's par for course. ये तो रोज चलता रहता है. Within 30 seconds, people forget it because you have to move to the next argument. किसी के पास ये बैठ के बोल दिया. ये reaction देने का किसी के पास में time होता है. You have a thick skin, you proceed to the next issue immediately. That's the professional. Okay, you proceed immediately. Hi. You don't sit and cry there. Right? Nobody did anything. Now you go and see some of the YouTube videos on this particular interaction. Sai Deepak snubbed by the Supreme Court. And you should see the people in the comment section. अरे टाइटल में उसमें अंतर है, ऐसा कुछ नहीं हुआ. The people are saying this. जो पढ़ रहा है, so what is this? This is clickbait reportage, right? You just want to sell it. And the other side of this thing, someone says, Sai Deepak takes on the Chief Justice of India. What are you saying? What is going on here? There are comments to this, there are titles to this particular effect. And I should say this on record. The entire bench was so patient, was absolutely respectful. No interruption whatsoever during the course of the submissions. Not just for me, I was not given any special treatment by anyone for that matter. इतने सारे लोगों को सुनना है on such an important issue. You can't let people keep giving pravachan for days together, no? They'll say, come to the point, finish quickly. The Indian Supreme Court is way more patient than its counterparts in United States or United Kingdom. And people in the profession will tell you this. Supreme Court of United States sits for only certain months in a year for oral hearings. The rest of the time it is written submissions which see the arguments through, they present the arguments through written submissions. So basically what you're asked to do is, 20 मिनट दिया जाएगा, यहाँ पे बजर शुरू हो जाएगा, आप अपने पोजीशन की समरी दे देंगे and then you'll say बाकी आप पढ़ लो. That's it. You won't walk them through the entire document, read from judgment to judgment. That doesn't happen. That happens only in India. Okay? Particularly if it happens to be the Supreme Court of this country, the Constitutional Court, you cannot use this as a forum for grandstanding. You will need to come to the point, come quickly, because it's not just your matter. आपके मैटर में आपके पहले और बाद में आर्ग्यू करने वाले बहुत सारे होंगे, बट आपके अलावा भी इतने सारे मैटर्स हैं. And this is a court with lakhs of cases pending still, right? And across the country, you're looking at 5 crores at the very least. So therefore, I think people, while they can keep clamoring for more transparency, more democratization, some sense of responsibility must come to the public also. Look at the language you've used for members of the bench in your comments. How fair is it? Memes chala rahe hain, ye sab kar rahe hain. That's because this is trigger happy behavior, which is also induced by the very same social media that empowers your speech. I think the dynamics of respect and the dynamics of sobriety, the dynamics of sophistication have been significantly altered by social media. If anything, it has only dumbed it down, is my humble opinion. It could be wrong. And gradually it will come to a point where people say, perhaps in some subjects, it is best to leave it to experts. वो उसका भी टाइम आएगा. Because right now our individual egos need massage. Oh, I too need to feel important. I too need to be included. So that ego will be massaged for a while. And when they realize it's going to produce ultra garbage from all sides, then they will say, oh, if everybody gets to say everything and everybody is equally right, what is the direction that we are going to take? Then they'll say, okay, there needs to be a telescoping of opinion. Listen to everyone, but don't necessarily adhere to everyone. Go to the saner voices, the more informed voices. This is not the building of any varnashrama system within the speech. I am saying that is the law of nature gradually. Voices which are most effective and which actually make sense will start gradually appealing to people who mean well and who understand that sometimes it is best for us to remain silent on subjects where we know nothing. Iska time aayega. Next. Please choose. I don't want people to think it's a scripted session. Please choose. I leave it to the moderators.
Jai Shri Ram, sir.
Jai Shri Ram.
Firstly, I need to clarify that I'm not from the legal background.
Okay.
So I guess much of what I've had to ask has already been covered. But still, if there is something to add, please do.
Sure.
So recently, we saw that the Supreme Court had reserved its verdict regarding the legalization of same-sex marriage.
Right.
So given that it's no secret that much of the judiciary aligns itself with the woke worldview, or at least that's what the masses think.
That's not true.
So what strategy did you adopt to get a favorable outcome, as it's very difficult to persuade people from that end of the ideological spectrum?
I've said this before, that they don't teach astrology as part of LLB. Okay, so I have no idea. I don't know if there is a favorable outcome. We have no idea. I don't think it's right to reveal any strategy because there is also the aspect of privilege, right? I'm after all representing a client even if it's a public interest litigation. What I'm at liberty to say without violating any of my obligations as a practicing litigator is that no, it is untrue that the judiciary is populated by people who are woke in their ideological persuasions. That's not true. Okay? 2, not all leftist persuasions are necessarily woke. There is a difference. Please strike a difference there also. Okay? Because you need to always find reasonable actors to engage with whom you can have a dialogue. Sometimes you may not agree, but at the very least, can the person be reached out to for sanity? The definition of being woke is they are prone to taking insane positions, or at the very least, insane methods for sane positions. There's a difference there also, right? So don't operate under that belief, because when you do that, what you're doing is you're giving up on the system completely. That's a zero-sum game. What is the way forward after that? You may feel good in making that statement because an institution has been branded. Ho gaya, okay. Your ego has been satisfied, the anger has been massaged. What next? No. That is the difference between a civilian and a practitioner. Okay, so I will not proceed with that at all. 3, it is good to make social arguments in legal matters involving societal issues. But it is never good to make political arguments in a legal forum unless the matter is fundamentally political. Okay? That's an important lesson. You want to be taken seriously by the institution, behave like a practicing litigator who respects the institution, knows how a submission is supposed to be made, and stick to the point. That is how it is supposed to be done. When that happens, sometimes you may instinctively disagree with someone's position. Why do you need someone to argue, you tell me? Documents hai, written submissions hai. Why do you need a person standing there? Because the person is bringing his, her, or whatever their own persuasive capabilities to explain how this is to be seen. Because the same document, when read by a person in the confines of their privacy, will not have the tone in which it is supposed to be read. Why are divorces happening more these days? Because people are communicating on texts. Breakups are happening because of text messages. Simple funda. Para agar chadne lag gaya, text ko band karo, call karo bhai. Don't immediately go for texting because it will create all sorts of... Now, if this is the thing when it comes to interpersonal communication, in matters such as these, you're reading with political biases, you're looking at individual biases. Ye aaya hoga, to ye to sangi hoga hi hoga. Itne sare biases honge, right? So you have to try and present. Okay, let's assume that all the labels that you choose to impute to me are right. Why would that still make my position untenable? Let me explain that. No, I'll try and be reasonable in my position. I think, without revealing anything specific, all I can say is the broader strategy is always to aim for balance and restraint. Not every issue is capable of being balanced by both sides. Sometimes only one side is right. That I will not even beat around the bush. This is called the tyranny of balance. Will you try to infuse and coerce balance into positions or subjects where it is not possible to, or where you should not be doing? But in this case, balance was warranted. So the art of advocacy is to try and get them to look at what you're trying to present. The tone in which you present it, the manner in which you present it, the kind of arguments that you choose to escalate is a function of your reading of the situation. So it's not just about the case, it is about atmosphere. It is about reading the signs in ether. That is a very different ballgame altogether. That depends on your situational awareness. Literally, it is reading the heaviness or the lightness in the air when you talk, as you keep talking. 3, never approach with an adversarial sense, saying, oh, they are hostile, I need to somehow prove that I'm right. You're delivering a mandate here as a lawyer, so keep your personal ego aside and focus on making the point in the interest of the person who's given you the job to deliver in the court. There you will not say, you know who I am, Google me and all that. Yes, you shouldn't be doing that. That is nothing. You're a nobody. All this is useless in court. In a court, you are only a lawyer, you're a professional. Stick to that. I have seen this, if you can call it a strategy, at the very least deliver receptivity, if not agreement, in the most politically incorrect situations. Imagine if someone were to say, Sabarimala, this fellow took an anti-woman position. Marital rape also, he has taken an anti-woman position. Here he has taken a homophobic position. Imagine how much of injustice it does to the specificity of my arguments, to the layered nature of my position. You see what I'm saying? So, fortunately, people in the system, since they have been on my side of the aisle before they went on this side, they know exactly where this is coming from. They know what I'm trying to do. So, which is why I never let social media angst to affect me even remotely when I argue in a court of law. Sometimes before these matters, people will send me messages. Sir, आप ये कर दीजिए, sir, आप वो कर दीजिए. ये इंस्टा रील नहीं है. टेक इट वेरी सीरियसली. ये यूट्यूब चैनल नहीं है, आपने शुरू कर दिया और आपने चिल्लाना शुरू कर दिया. डोंट डू दैट. Because when you're doing that, after a point, you're not drawing attention to the issue, you're drawing attention to yourself. Learn to keep your ego aside is the biggest thing, because there are things bigger than you. And that is a lesson most people learn very late in life. I've learned it fairly quickly. So which is why I step back. When I know yahan pe mujhe bolne ki zarurat nahi, I don't need to. If there's a better person to say what I should be saying, I don't need to say it. Someone else doing the job, leave it. Next. A lady first, and then we'll come back to boys, huh? Yeah.
Pranam, sir.
Pranam.
First of all, thank you for coming to Ahmedabad again.
Thank you, it's my pleasure. I love the city, notwithstanding the roads.
Thank you.
I thought it would actually be a model city considering who it belongs to, but theek hai.
The rains do that.
Sorry?
The rains do that sometimes.
I know. I don't know what the problem is. I actually thought this would be a template for a smart city. Because you see, I'll tell you this. When I used to intern here at AMA Ahmedabad as a law school student in 2008, I'll tell you why my impression of the city, I always have a soft corner. I'm not pandering to your egos as Ahmedabadis or Karnavatis. Okay. For a different reason altogether. I used to be almost the last person to leave the campus for two reasons. The food in Vastrapur campus was fantastic. Okay? And IIM campus is great in terms of food. And when you're living on a stipend and you're a student, free food is the best thing you can ask for. Right? I used to be the last person to leave, so at the bus stand I'd wait, and 3 or 4 days I'd wait. Two things happened. One day an auto guy stood right in front of me. I thought, why is he waiting? Maybe he's waiting for somebody. He said, बैठ जाओ. I said, okay. And he said, आप रोज यहाँ पे खड़े होते हैं ना, चलो हम आपको drop कर देते हैं. Without money, by the way. I got a free lift from someone who observed me standing at 11:30 outside the campus near the bus stand. So that I saw. 3, here's the culture shock. Delhi introduces you to some beautiful language. Okay? Which comes handy in certain situations. I realized the lowest tier of that language here was enough for a fight. Which is to say, that the courtesy that people observe here in terms of the language that is to be used, even in a fight, is way better. I've seen that happen so many times. So, and I should also say this. Maybe perhaps I've been to the wrong parts of Ahmedabad, that's a possibility. There is a possibility. However, in the interest of what this state has come to represent at the national level, I think there is a duty and there is an obligation to set the house in order on few aspects. It's a very important state. I'll tell you why. You're not a state, you are a model now. Right? And what do they keep pitting you against some other state? Because it happens to be in the red belt. Right? Therefore, your success as a state in every way is crucial for this model to become the model worthy of emulation. Infrastructure, culturally, demographically, in every sense possible. So it's very, very crucial. Please continue with the question. I'm sorry, I get pulled off. Yeah, go on.
No worries, sir. Sir, so I recently had the fortune of meeting Conrad
Right,
Els.
right.
And I met him in person, so we had a good long discussion.
Fantastic. He's a living rishi according to me.
He is. So he was here at Indus University, Center for Indic Studies.
Right.
And at a stay, we met him. So we were having a discussion along these lines. And I asked him, sir, what could be one way that we preserve our civilizational values without, taking a legal, getting into judiciary and going to courts and everything. So he said the easiest and the most concrete way you can do it is provide scientific temper for whatever you say.
Okay.
So I am a bit confused about what that would mean. So could you help
Actually,
me?
I am flummoxed. I'm just trying to understand what it meant. Because
Right.
he is not someone who says anything lightly.
Right.
Whatever he says, I usually read multiple layers into it. I genuinely don't know. Perhaps it needs a bit more of thought. And if it comes from Dr. Elst, even my brain needs some time. I need to process it. I don't know.
Sir, I have another question.
Yes,
May I?
please.
Right. So I'm currently interning at a place. I'm a law student, and me and my co-interns, we were having a discussion about humility and servitude while taking our clients.
Right.
So one of the arguments presented by my co-intern was that I should never forget that a person's life is in my hand.
Right.
And the other argument on the other side was that you should still detach yourself from the case.
Right.
So how do we draw that line?
See, it's...
Thank you.
If you think of any professional journey as a marathon and not a 100-meter dash or sprint, then you need to preserve your own sensitivity. Because if it constantly takes hits, and every case, you have to realize that civil commercial litigation, we are not exactly in the business of saving people's lives in terms of life itself, right? And one of the reasons people end up making the choice is asking themselves, do I have the mental strength to do this or not? That's a very clear question that students end up asking themselves. I certainly don't think I have what it takes to answer the question from a criminal lawyer's perspective. I have not been in their shoes, and therefore I think it would be stupid on my part and presumptive on my part to explain what they would feel. I don't know. Okay? And as someone who argues in criminal matters at the appellate side, not at the trial side, literally I get a digested brief by the time I go to the High Court. So that's a different ballgame altogether. But it doesn't mean that commercial matters don't affect you or constitutional matters don't affect you. Right? Which is where I think the training of a professional is very, very crucial. Very crucial. One of the matters where, for several reasons, and with time I think I've become better. I'm not trying to talk about myself here, but because the question was about professional journey, the best example I have where I know for a fact what happened was my journey. So my apologies. When the Sabrimala judgment, the first judgment came out, the evening before I was only asking myself this question, अगर ये उल्टा पड़ा तो मेरा reaction क्या होगा? Multiple questions going on in my head. Why? अरे people ended up publicizing my arguments. उल्टा गया तो जूते भी मुझे ही पड़ेंगे. As a professional, I have to think of that also. They'll say, बच्चे को खड़ा कर दिया, ये हो गया, देखो नतीजा. The fact is, before me, all diggajs argued. Who? Dr. Singhvi, Sri Parasaran. Everybody argued and we are all from the same side, at least for this matter. So that was one question. Second question was, it's a temple which I dearly love. It's an institution, it's a sampradaya that I am a part of. I've been to the temple as a student of 9th standard in 1998. I've walked the entire 62 kilometers. I've observed the vrat. I've done all of that. I know exactly what happens there. I know how women in households take this vrata seriously. They are equal participants because you can't observe a vrat without the support of your family, whoever they may be. No vrat can be done that way, right? So I was wondering what will happen. So I said, okay, let's see what the moment does. Sometimes it's best to leave the decisions to that moment. It will clarify multiple things. Because once it happens, there are no more options left. When you have too many options on the table, sometimes you're confused. So wait. I literally smiled widely like a Cheshire cat when the judgment came out. And there's a good reason for it. Because this community needed a serious kick. If we had succeeded in that particular situation itself, the larger problem that's actually happening, people wouldn't have awakened at all. 1,000 lectures couldn't have done what that single negative judgment did across the country. Sabarimala was no more a Kerala temple. It was now seen as a Hindu institution. And therefore the message that people like me were trying to deliver, at least since 2016 when I openly started speaking on these subjects, when I went independent as a litigator, that message now got the critical mass that it needed. The megaphone had been handed to us now. Tell me that the situation has not changed after the verdict of 2018. Tell me that people's minds have not changed on the very same subject. I know for a fact it has changed. People who were otherwise on the other end of the spectrum on this very subject have changed. At the very least, they have come to centrism. Saying, even if I think that what is happening in this temple is wrong, why is this treatment reserved only for this temple? And why is this treatment being meted out only to our institutions? That question has come on people's lips. This is what we are waiting for. Good, very good. Then the thought is immediately strategic. The difference between a naive person and a professional, or an amateur and a professional, is that you start thinking of plan B, plan C, plan D, step 2, step 3, step 4. Prepare for the eventuality because you don't have the time to sit and whine. That is crucial. And this is not going to happen if you take hits each time emotionally. Channel the emotion in your preparation. Channel the emotion in the way you present it by striking a balance between emotion and reason. But when the outcome comes, you take the Gita position. Okay, maybe this was meant to happen for a different reason. If I have to see the silver lining here, what is the silver lining here? How do I go from there? That is the way I would go about it. Next. Okay, looks like every question leads to more questions. Okay, one gentleman. Yes, please. With you with the specs, and then we'll come back to you.
Namaste, sir. Good evening.
Namaste.
I was wondering about your insights into the 2-day-old judgment of the US Supreme Court to reverse the affirmative action against the Harvard University. Since I was following some of your arguments on the affirmative action, the program that we've been running historically, both at the educational level and at the professional level in employments, what do you think of the racial identity as being the aspect of the racial identity being the aspect of affirmative action?
Important. That is the crucial aspect. Let me start with the caveat first. I've been traveling. I haven't read the judgment. Okay, so I'm not going to faff around when it comes to my subjects. But the point or the finger or the issue that you've put your finger on is crucial. They speak of race. Our caste divisions are not race-based divisions, and that is the entire attempt through resolutions in California and Seattle to give caste the same treatment as race, as if the Aryan invasion theory is a reality. Which is why one of the first questions, so there's a group where we discuss this and someone was very interested. Oh, look at this, look at this. One of my friends asked a brilliant question. It's on race, what has it got to do with India? Why are we actually concerned about it? Our affirmative action or our reservation system is not based on race. Not at all. Why should we be interested in it? Because Anglosphere is still governed by and animated by ethnocentrism. We are not. We haven't. We are based on consciousness, not on ethnicity. Kings like Kanishka and Harshavardhana, if you actually look at them, they've come from those parts which you associate with China today. What are you looking at? Why do you treat them as part of Indian history and not Chinese history? Because you're looking at consciousness. And that consciousness is influenced by dharma. Dharma not being the same as religion. So, why should I be concerned about it is one way of looking at it. But yes, there will be certain observations on treatment, on merit, on meritocracy, the future of meritocracy. These are aspects. On questions of privilege, race-based privilege. So even if race doesn't apply, privilege as an argument has come to India. Because now we are being told there is a caste-based privilege and all that. I won't entirely discount it. But that's as good or as bad as fighting against opportunity and chance and probability and therefore life itself. Because everybody will have something which they've inherited in one way or the other. What are you going to sit and fight and equalize all the time? I am yet to see that. But my initial reaction is, given that it speaks of a race-based affirmative action, I would still be very cautious in applying its lessons one way or the other in the Bharatiya context. Rest, I'll have to read it. Next, ma'am, please.
Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
I'm Akriti Mishra. Sir, my question is regarding the tussle between the parliament and the judiciary.
Yes.
Almost all the amendments that we have seen throughout the years, they are generally a response to some judgment which the judiciary has given, and
Okay.
to nullify the base of the reason, they bring an amendment in the constitution. So, and vice versa, I'm sorry, I don't precisely remember the number of the article, but there was some article that specifically barred the jurisdiction of Supreme Court. It barred the people from approaching Supreme Court regarding some issue.
Okay.
And the constitutionality of that amendment was challenged. And interestingly, if Supreme Court had observed that article, that amendment, it could not have taken up the case for consideration, but interestingly it did, and it struck down that particular article, and
Okay.
On the basis of unconstitutionality.
Okay.
So in light of this, where does the doctrine of checks and balances and where does it render the doctrine of checks and balances, and the purpose for which the provision of amendment was inserted, that with the time the society changes and there will be need for an amendment, but it has remained only as response to some
Okay, I get your question.
judicial judgments.
So I don't think statistically it's true that legislative amendments have been largely a reactionary response to what the judiciary has said. I don't think that's been the case. Rather, constitutional amendments. There could be some legislative amendments. So for instance, the Shah Bano judgment being reversed through an amendment under the Rajiv Gandhi government. There could be some of those examples. See, on the doctrine of separation of powers and the theory of checks and balances, some people, in fact I think most people try and look for some kind of a resolution of the issue. कि कहीं तो ये खत्म होगी ये बात. It won't happen. Because the power tussle is a constant between institutions. Institutional pushback, apart from the ego angle of the human beings that populate that institution, is also a question of territory and turf. Okay? I think that's always going to be there. Sometimes what happens is, more than a constitutional argument, although imprecise and not exactly scientific, public barometer is useful. Because lawyers sometimes they get lost in technicality. And when you get lost in technicality, the sharpest of points usually emerge through the application of common sense and not technicality. And that is where public discussion sometimes helps. So let's take some of these contentious issues wherever we have said that why is the court ruling on some of these aspects? It must be left to the parliament, right? Some people made the argument through judgments, saying, look at it, this is what you have said in the previous judgment. They cited precedent to basically ask the institution to respect its own past rulings. But the alternative strategy that has worked, and this is partially a response to your question, is draw the big picture consequence of a particular position and say, should you choose to open this door for this issue, you've opened the floodgates actually for several other issues. And sometimes that argument works much better than a hyper-technical legal argument. Which is to say, you say that this is an important issue, concerns a very important human right, and therefore I will open this door for this purpose. What stops a future person or a future bench from doing the very same thing with respect to those issues that they think are important? Who decides what is important? And if that were to happen on a repeated basis, what exactly remains of the sanctity of an elected legislature and its prerogative to give effect to public will or electoral will? Those are questions which I think there will never be a closed-ended answer to this. Which is why I have deemed it fit to answer some of these questions more from an issue-to-issue perspective. So for instance, on the decriminalization of homosexuality under 377, do I agree with the intervention of the judiciary? Yes. On the question of legalizing same-sex marriages, my position is clear. Sorry, I don't think you should get into the picture. On the question of, let's say, triple talaq, should the judiciary have actually gotten into the picture? Counterintuitive, contrary to popular perception, I'm actually not sure of it. Because is a secular judiciary which has no religious training good to understand scripture? If I say that you don't understand Sabrimala, how can I say in the same breath you're trying to understand the Quran or the ayats? I can't make that argument, no? There will be a serious inconsistency in my own position. So the conscious decision that I have taken is don't give a conclusive response to the application of the doctrine without understanding the context in which you wish to apply the doctrine. It will be contextual, it will be issue based. So checks and balances का जो ये game है ये तो चलता रहेगा. It will happen all the time. If you were to go by perhaps the Marxist reading of Bharatiya history or Sanatana Dharm's history, they'll actually say that the fight between Parashurama and Kshatriyas is the fight between the tyranny of the muscle and the response of the one who is trained in the Veda. Saying, sorry, I need to respond now because you can't get away with this. You're literally violating Veda and you're literally violating Dharma. And Veda Dharma, which is typically embodied or personified in the form of the sacred cow, is under attack. And if the one who is supposed to protect the cow itself is actually attacking it, then I will have to step into the picture. So literally what we are doing is Go Raksha. Because that's how you look at Kala Chakra. You're saying it's the Kali Yuga is in the form of a cow. When Kali happens, the cow is literally standing on its last leg because the number of people who practice Vedas have come down by 25% or actually to 25%. That's the reading of it. So I think this power tussle will go on. I don't think I'm concerned about that. The hope is that each time one particular institution crosses the Lakshman Rekha, there must be another institution with the will as well as the resources to hit back. That is what I'm more interested in. One entity completely takes over, whoever it may be, whether it's the government or the judiciary, that arrogation should never happen. That concentration of power should never happen. Assuming that you believe in the concept of a constitutional democracy with multiple organs. Dare I say this, even in the Indian context, monarchy never translated to complete concentration of power in the hands of the king. Never. Rarely. Even if the Raja is seen as the Pratinidhi of the deity himself or God himself, there are serious restrictions on his limitations. His personal life is scrutinized down to the last detail. His schedule is drawn by the Purohit. There are articles written by this brilliant person who I regularly read when it comes to issues of Dharma, Sandeep Balakrishna. His portal is called Dharma Dispatch. Some of his better articles are on a different journal called Preksha. Do read it. And he has actually explained how this works. These are So clearly our concept of monarchy is not the kind of monarchy that led to the French Revolution. When people are dying, you say, let them have cake. That's not how we operate. So I think I'm always interested in at least there being one institution, either societal or statist, which has the ability to push back and punch. Next. Okay. Ma'am, I'll come back to you. Let's take one question somewhere. Yes, I'll come to you. So we have exactly 10 minutes and we'll wrap it up in 10 minutes. I'll keep my answer short because the questions are actually short.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Namaste, Sai.
So hold on. So you, and then ma'am there. Yes, yes.
Currently, what weapons do we have as a society? What weapons or tools or powers that the society have, if any, to free temples from the state control?
You see, there is a reason why I've stopped delivering lectures on the subject. Because I think the articulation of the problem is already done and dusted. I have done this enough. In terms of solutions, we have presented tentative solutions to stakeholders in the central government, publicly also. So the easiest way is, the Gurudwaras in this country are governed by the Gurudwara Act of 1920. And Gurudwaras are not state controlled. So why isn't that legislation being considered, at the very least, the starting point of a uniform temple code, a UTC? Let's discuss that first. That's more important to me than a UCC. I'm actually more interested in a UTC because that can actually solve a lot of problems without a UCC. That's my clear reading of it. So when people say iska kya hoga, are we actually making the argument that Hindus are incapable of running their own institutions whereas every other community is capable of? Is the majority so self-loathing that it doesn't have the trust in itself? Are we such bad Macaulay Putras? I don't understand. That can't be the argument. Are there no states in this country where there's an example? Goa temples are free of state control. They say chota state hai. ठीक है, अब छोटे प्रदेशों से तो शुरुआत कीजिए, उससे बात करते हैं, then we'll talk. उत्तराखंड में छोड़ दिया आपने, हिमाचल में छोड़ दीजिए, Kerala छोड़ दीजिए. What is a communist who doesn't believe in God doing in my temple? Get out. If HRC appointees have to be practicing Hindu legally, how can the minister be a communist? All the Karamcharis have to be Hindus, practicing Hindus, but the man sitting on the top is not. And he will organize a beef festival in Kaladi, the birthplace of Shankaracharya. And we should sit and tolerate that person as the minister who is in charge of my institution. Go Raksha aapka kaam hona chahiye, ab kar kya rahe hain? Are people uncomfortable? Don't be. It's a crucial issue. That is what you've been fighting for centuries now. Don't be. Next. So, give it some time. We'll see what's happening. Perhaps pay attention to what's happening with the Chidambaram temple. How people are taking over, how the Dravidian government Dravidianist government rather, is attacking an institution which has won its freedom from the Supreme Court. And despite victory from the Supreme Court, how it can be tormented and tortured. Here's a live example of it. I've been speaking to the Dikshitars on and off. There are people on the ground who are helping. Sometimes it's best to let more people on the ground and local dramatists personally do the talking, because then you're enabling strength on the ground. If one person keeps jumping into every issue and goes everywhere, where is the encouragement for people on the ground to act? No, you do it. When it comes to the Supreme Court, I'm here. Until then, you do your job there. Next.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
You said in one of the debates you are not a South Indian, I am an Indian from down south.
Correct.
So, few leaders from down south say that if delimitation happens on the basis of population, there will be a wide north-south divide.
Right.
So, I wanted to know your view on delimitation, and do you think there is any sense of animosity between people of these two parts of the country? Thank you.
One, why are the North and South so self-obsessed? What about East and West? I don't understand. Look at what's happening in the Northeast, no? Isn't that very important? If a similar issue had been happening in any other part of the country, would we be talking like this? What is happening there is so utterly sensitive. The history of it, I'm happy to really speak on. I've done my reading to a limited extent on the subject. And when you look at what's happening, what the white British man could not achieve, someone else is achieving right now. It's very problematic. A new flag has reared its head under a government with a brute majority. You can't say Kashmir ka 370 gaya when somebody else is raising another flag elsewhere, no? Kashmir is not let's say a particular state. It is a state of affairs. And the lesson should be that the state of affairs must never be replicated anywhere else. Anybody does it, the state must come down on them like a ton of bricks. And India continues to be a soft state under every government. It is a soft state. Jiski lathi uski bhains is the rule that's been since 1947. Every stone pelter and everyone who takes a Kalashnikov in his hand can dictate terms to the government. And that is what is happening. What message are you giving to law-abiding people? You are basically telling me, तुम ये करोगे तो मैं तुम्हारी बात सुनूंगा. How will humans learn? अच्छा तो इसके साथ ये हो रहा है क्योंकि ये कर रहा है. Then where does this go from there? On the question of North and South, I don't think the situation is as bad as the 60s or as bad as the anti-Hindi agitation of 1950s. But the reason why it is kept boiling, this nasty venomous pot is kept boiling, is because of the most pernicious form of secessionist movement the history of this country has seen. It is Dravidianism and Dravidianism alone. It is not Kashmir militancy because there the enemy is clear. Because there is support from across the border. Here there's someone sitting inside, enjoying funds from several other places, and he is doing this on a regular basis. And he is doing this since the birth of the Russian Revolution, because this movement also started in 1917. So, I think Dravidianists must be held responsible. But the other side of the equation, I said this in my lecture at BHU, everyone from whichever part of the country they may be, if they think of themselves as Bharatiya, apart from their mother tongue, they must learn another Bharatiya language, without a doubt. If you don't do that, you may learn a particular language because of economic reasons, because you have to move to some place or whatever. But I would want a greater integrative reason for learning another language. It shouldn't be just economics. Because you'll still learn the language, but ghrina to khatam nahi hogi na. That will still go on. You're learning the language because that's your means of livelihood. You can't survive without it. But the poison within and the separatism within will not die. Which is why I switch to Hindi often. To say my complexion and Hindi get along really well, don't worry. They will get along well. There's nothing wrong with it at all. After all, the purest form of Sanskrit has survived in the South, not anywhere else, for historical reasons. So we will protect it. We don't have a problem with it at all. I can't have a problem with a language which has the very same script as Sanskrit. Dravidians have a problem with Sanskrit, and that is why they have a problem with Hindi, is the calculation most people miss. Their problem is with the Hindu identity, and therefore everyone who represents the Hindu identity is a problem. So the person coming from the cow belt who speaks Hindi is a problem precisely for that. And this is a very different example to give. I would say they were put in their place better by perhaps Nehru at some point and Indira Gandhi at some point actually. Whereas we are massaging their ego by constantly spewing this lie that Tamil is the oldest language. Don't say that. Tamil need not be the oldest language for it to be respected. There are other reasons for it. Because obviously it is certainly older than Hindi, that is equally a fact. It has its own rich literature. It has its own vocabulary. When I say its own, it doesn't mean it's isolated, because you see, as Bharat, we have literally, it's like a vast ocean where every small tributary or river has drawn from other, let's say, tributaries or rivulets. It has happened across the board. Because one thing that is common to most parts of this country are the two epics, the Mahakavyas. So naturally, your examples, when you think of food and strength, you'll think of Bhima. When you think of questions, you'll think of Yaksha Prashna. Or you'll think of the discussion between Yama and Nachiketa. you will have these discussions. So the examples are common because the culture is common, the sroth is common. The current fight is sub-regionalism being given precedence over the civilizational identity. And the civilizational identity is the product of thousands of years of synthesis, and that is being undone. Pull each thread at a time. Kapda kahan se bachega uske baad? Next, ma'am. This is the last question.
Jai Shri Ram, Deepak
Jai Shri
garu.
Ram.
Bagunara.
Bagunarani.
It was wonderful listening to you once again.
Thank you.
I've had multiple opportunities to listen to you in Hyderabad also.
Oh, is it?
And
Bhagyanagar.
it is so heartening that you mentioned the Sabrimala issue, and myself being born in deep Rajasthan.
Okay.
I stood for Sabrimala issue with Swami C.S. Rangarajan Garu, Monica
wonderful.
Reddy, and we all Sanatan Dharmavalambis were
Right.
standing day and night
Right.
for the Sabrimala, our own temple.
Right.
So I feel that the issue of North and South, it doesn't exist. Actually, it exists in our minds. First of all, now coming to the beginning of your lecture, you mentioned the synthetic document, right? I was hearing Justice Abdul Nazir also in Hyderabad. He mentioned that it's the time we should Indianize our constitution.
Correct.
Right? See, being secular, ignoring the majority, doesn't represent the whole essence of a civilization. So this becomes a drift or a divide when we are having a document which is calling itself secular but acting as anti-Hindu,
Correct.
non-Hindu, I would say. It acts somewhere as non-Hindu when it is suppressing somewhere the extreme core and essence of our civilization, which is Sanatan Dharma.
Correct.
And I'm proud Sanatan Dharmi. Now, talking on the issue of LGBTQ rights, Deepak ji, somewhere law is giving them, some legal rights, some identity. Definitely, every human being has a right to have, all pride and
Understood.
whatever. But on the other hand, if that pride parade or the extreme glorifying of something which is not the essence of my dharma, what is my right? How can I protect my Sanatan Dharma? Where is the legal protection of Sanatan Dharma, which is the actual essence of this whole nation? So how can my civilization be protected from some Western ideology which is, swaying the whole younger generation away?
Right.
Right? On a lighter note, I would wind up. How can we free temples in Telangana if BJP and KCR both are not keeping this issue in the manifesto in the coming elections? Thank you, Deepak. Please answer.
See. So one of the things, I'll answer the final question first quickly. As long as the Hindu interest is held hostage to any single organization, this will be your fate. And therefore, I believe that nobody can claim to be the sole representative of our interests unless they actually act in accordance with that belief by implementing policy changes, not mere symbolic changes. And the biggest policy change to demonstrate your claim to being the sole or the primary guardian of Hindu interest is by freeing our religious institutions from state control, even if you are in power, and especially because you're in power. 2, the other thing is we have, according to me, enacted weaponized legislations which encourage encroachment of property in favor of one particular community. That needs to be addressed. So these are the two issues which, according to me, which have to go hand in hand. free us, and stop encroachment. 2, on the question, what was your first question? LGBTQ issue, right. Now, here's the thing, and this, I think, calls for a slightly more complex answer. Hindus suddenly care for temples because somebody cares for mosques. Hindus suddenly start thinking about LGBTQ because West is talking about LGBTQ. Hindus suddenly think of environment when the West starts talking about environment, or the left is taking up environmentalism. Why? Until then, where is our originality? आपकी हिंदुत्व जो है तभी जागरूक होती है जब किसी और को आप देखते हैं. That is equally a problem. I have seen this in several institutions and several subjects. Why did it require someone from the West? Because you see, they are anyway mischievous evangelists. I'll just use it in a very secular way, right? I am not giving any religious identity to their evangelism. People are welcome to draw their own conclusions. They are mischievous evangelists looking for entry points through societal fissures which already exist, or fault lines which already exist, or fault lines which are not that strong but which can be wedged and pried open. That's what they're looking at. This is not something that is a relatively new phenomenon. It's been going on at least for the last 2 centuries. I'd say at least for the last 2 centuries. The investment goes well beyond the 70 years. Where is the strategic thinking from the Hindu community to try and address internal weaknesses? There are temples dedicated to the Tritiya Prakriti, run by them with deities. Why do we suddenly remember them only when the Western LGBTQ agenda is here? You see, I am not saying that we too are the same as the West when it comes to this issue. No, we actually have a very different position. Dignity 100% yes. Treatment 100% yes. But can it become the norm? We have our positions on that. That's where we are entitled to draw our positions in terms of our civilizational positions. Because we respect a certain institution, and an institution which requires procreation, because there is a karma that is associated with it, there is a certain sanskara that is associated with it, with all these layers inbuilt in it, we respect this as the norm. Doesn't mean that we will disrespect you as the norm. We are only saying that when you look at moral compass, okay, let's take this discussion slightly forward. It's not as if all marriages today are succeeding, and it's not as if all marriages lead to children. So why should we actually be governed by the concept of dampatya or progeny to define marriage as an institution? If 2 elderly single people at some point decide to marry each other for the sake of companionship, where is the question of procreation there in terms of begetting a child after a point? Right? So if those examples exist, how do you then treat this as the norm? The answer is this. A norm is decided by treating something as the aspirational ideal, even if the society does not follow it everywhere. Which is to say, if this is the standard, you get to see deviation. यहाँ से कितना हो रहा है, वहाँ से कितना हो रहा है. Standard को ही अगर आपने कम कर दिया, बचेगा क्या? I'll take one of the arguments forward. Assume for a moment that 4 or 5 people are happily existing in a multi-amorous relationship. They are all consenting adults, and hopefully not brothers and sisters, right? Who are prohibited by degrees of freedom, right? And they are doing so. Question should be, तुम्हारा क्या जा रहा है? That is a harm question, right? That is the harm principle being put in action. So should we elevate this to the status of a norm? The norm is always going to be defined by a certain degree of puritanism, whether you like that word or not. The question is, people are yet to understand the concept of the slippery slope, where you keep diluting the standards step by step, stage by stage, and kill the institution, and then nothing remains of that institution. Then you get what is currently going on in America. where people don't know what is content which is capable of being consumed by children. They don't understand the concept of public spaces. The concept of public morality is gone. Here's the worst possible argument that they can make. There are so many fantastic LGBTQ representatives who speak out against wokeism actually. Who actually speak out against this because they're saying, when you do this, you're delegitimizing my position. You're reinforcing every negative stereotype that every person of this particular sexual orientation is necessarily a pervert who is a pedophile in hiding. Don't do that. They keep saying this. Who's listening to them? Now, the other side will not listen to them because this is a politically incorrect voice. So who's supposed to give them the megaphone? Us. Because if you and I say this, homophobe, this and that, all sorts of allegations will come. Patriarch, a man apparently can't speak against this. Who can speak against this? I don't understand. Until you are this, you can't speak. Why will I change my gender for this man? Or my orientation for that matter? You have to be this to be able to speak at this. Acha. So everyone who speaks of a caste atrocity, do you come from the community which has been oppressed? Don't speak, no then. That logic is very selectively applied. The larger point is, don't wait for somebody else to pick up the issue. If you're serious about those people, then pick up the issue before somebody else does. Hindutva cannot be limited only to the aspect of history. It is also about people first. Institutions, people, dharma, prakriti, animals. I am someone who believes in the concept of Pashubali as a vegetarian. But I'm equally a dog lover. I have 3 dogs. I don't see a dissonance in this. There is no cognitive dissonance in these positions. That has a different sanctity. This is a different perspective altogether. I know where love ends and obligation begins. And I know where, let's say, you need to draw the line between this all-pervasive concept called love, 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 and love. Sorry, some things are not based on love. They're based on the concept of duty and obligation. Does every father love his son? It could be just because of obligation also. There is an obligation, right? The point I'm trying to make is, I think we have made public discussions very mushy, extremely mushy. There is no room for clear-cut positions. There is no room for certitude. There is no room for obligation. There's no room for duty. There's only room for right, 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 and right. आज की सभा जय श्री राम.
Thank you everyone for joining in for this wonderful session. On behalf of Ahmedabad Management Association, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Mr. J. Sai Deepak for delivering an outstanding session on the Constitution, Civilization and Judicial Intervention. Sai's expertise, eloquence and passion for the subject was evident throughout the entire session. We greatly appreciate Sai's dedication in preparing and presenting us with his views and his ability to foster the audience, and all his participations, in every meaningful dialogue added an immense value to the content and the session. The knowledge which we gained out of today's session is and will undoubtedly leave an lasting impact on our understanding of these vital and technical points as well. We're gratefully thankful for his contribution on our intellectual growth and advancement of our legal understanding as well. Once again, we extend our heartfelt thanks to Sai for his exceptional session and for sharing his expertise with us. Lastly, I would like to say, being a Gujarati, Avta Rejo is what we say. Usually, you are most welcome. Please do visit us again. Thank you for everyone for joining us. Right, we conclude our session here.